Okay, now this is part 2 of our demo for DHCP, and we've changed a couple things, but before we had this Win7 machine at address .77 and a Win8 machine at .88, and then after we configured them, the Win8 machine was at .2 and the Win7 was at .3. This server is always going to be at .1. So if we look at where we have it now, now we've changed the 7.3 to a 7.1, but we still have the 8 at .2 and the 7 machine at .3. Now one thing to look at is the DHCP lease. It runs for 8 days. Now it's 8 days if you have the computer on all the time. Now if you turn the computer on and off like at the end of the day, every time the computer reboots, it's going to ask for a new DHCP server, DHCP IP address from the DHCP server. So what we're going to do is just simulate what happens if our DHCP server is off. So what we're going when the computer is trying to grab a new address. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn off our Windows 8 machine. Just going to power it off, and then what we're going to do is we're going to deactivate the DHCP servers. So here's what we have right now. It still has 3 and 2, and if we go in here to the scope and we right click it, we can deactivate. Now this is a toggle thing, so if it's active it'll show deactivate. If it's not active, it'll show activate. So here we're going to deactivate it, and this says you know, this will stop clients from obtaining an IP address. Yes, we want to do that. And you can tell it's disabled because right here, it's really hard to see, but there's a little red dot, and that shows that it's disabled. Now also, if we went into the scope here, rather than deactivate, it says activate, which means right now it's deactivated. So what we're going to do is we're going to power on our Windows machine, and now it won't be able to get a DHCP address. Well, it won't be able to get an address from the DHCP server. But what happens with Microsoft products is they have an internal auto configuration private IP address system. So if we look at this in our block diagram while it's booting up, since it's not much to watch, if there's no communication when it's trying to boot up, it can't communicate with the DHCP server, so it can't get a new IP address. So it sits around and it finally can't get one, so it does the auto configuration where it comes up with an IP address by itself. Now that's all fine and dandy, except it's not going to be in the 10.0.0 network, and that's a network that we need to be in to operate. So we'll show what happens when that comes up, and we're going to have to wait a while it keeps rebooting. See, right now when it's rebooting, it's trying, one of the things when it's going through the boot process is it's trying to get a new IP address, but now it can't. So what happens is it gets the private address. Now there was some thought that, you know, if a bunch of computers, if you don't have a DHCP server for a long period of time, then all the computers can run off this internal private like network. But in real life it doesn't work that way, since most networks have backup DHCP servers. And what happens if we look at connections and details? Now the two things to notice is it has this auto configuration address, and the Microsoft auto configuration always starts out 169.254. Now the other thing to note is, because it comes up with this address by itself, it has no default gateway, it has no DNS server. So really there is no way for this machine to communicate to the outside world. This machine is out on an island by itself. And for that reason, this auto configuration is usually turned off. But if you have a computer in a network that can't communicate with the internet out here somewhere, it could be because initially when it turned on, it couldn't communicate with the DHCP server, so it's in this network all by itself. So what we're going to do is we'll just go back to our server, and we'll go in here to the scope, and what we'll do is we will activate the scope. So now we're activated, and now if we take a look at the leases, it still has 2 and 3, but now and that's what it had before, but one of the things you need to do is hit a refresh button. You can either hit this green circular arrow, or you can go to action, and it usually has refresh. So now it only has, if you refresh, it only has number 3, because the number 2 address was released once it picked up the internal private address. Now to get things back to normal, once you have your DHCP back up, what you can do is go to the command prompt, and we'll scroll around to it. And the ipconfig command has several, some switches that you need to use. The all will tell you everything you need to know in the configuration. Now here you can see that it has the address of 169.254 and then whatever. Now note that it still says DHCP is enabled, because as far as this computer is concerned, DHCP is still enabled, it just does not work right now. But you notice there is no default gateway, there is no address for a DHCP server, and the DNS server, the only thing it has, these are V6 addresses. It doesn't have any V4 addresses. So another thing you can do with the ipconfig is you can do the same command, but instead of this you can do release, and this should release it from the private internal address, and then afterwards, after it releases, you can do renew. Now it's going to renew the IP address with the DHCP server, and we can go back to the IP configuration all, and now you can see that we have our DNS servers back, we have our DHCP server address back, and our address is 10.0.0.2 back to what we had before. So if we look at the server once again, and we need to go into our administrative tools, DHCP. We must have closed that out. We can go into our helping up, and we want to go into V4 and click on the scope, and if we go to address leases, now we've got once again 2, 3. Now for some reason, not quite sure why, but our server address, which is 001, shows up as a bad address. Now also this is saying that the lease expiration is today in an hour. I'm not quite sure what that means. Since it should also have a, well, I don't know what that means, so we'll just let it go at that. So what you do usually to prevent the auto configuration address, you can go into the network and sharing where everything is at, and you can go into your adapters and right click on the properties, and the password. And in here for the IP4, you can go in for the properties. And now we want to obtain the IP address automatically, and we want to obtain the DNS automatically. If you go into the alternate configuration, it also has, you can configure the private IP address. Now, usually what you do nowadays, before they used to have this private address, if you have the DHCP server down for long periods of time. But now what they do is you can configure it, and right now we have it configured to an IP address that is still in our network, but it is outside of the range of the DHCP numbers. Our DHCP is just from 1 to 20. So we can configure it to 21. And so if it can't get with the DHCP, it'll just get the -21. Now if we look at the IP address, we'll know that it's not being received by the DHCP just because it's greater than 20. But a lot of times what they use this for is, if you have a laptop and you're at work, then you'll use the DHCP server. And if you're not at work, if you're at home or whatever, you're going to put this as a user configured address because you won't have a DHCP server, or you might not. A lot of routers nowadays have a little DHCP server built in. But this is what you would use. So either way, if you had this alternate configuration and if you could use this address, if the DHCP isn't working, it'll just get another address in the network, but it won't be provided by the DHCP server. Okay, now here you'll notice when we turn this on, we came up with 2 Ethernet connections. And somehow, I don't think that this is a valid thing. We can try to diagnose this. And it's going to detect if we have a problem here. And you just have to go through here. And now here it's resetting the adapter. And what we should have when we come back, and it's verifying the problem, is that one of that extra network that we had in there will have gone away. So it says it doesn't have a valid configuration, but it fixed the problem. So we close it, and now we're back to only having our private network. I'm not sure what happens if when it's obtaining the automatic private address, whether it does some weird magic that it tries to create another network to the public, but there's something there that I don't quite understand. But that is the end of part 2 of DHCP server.